Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. When somebody asks me, what is the secret to an amazing mix, I say there are three key components. The first, a really good sense of musicality. The second, hard work. And the third, trustable monitoring. And that is what today's video is going to be about. It is sponsored by Slate Audio and it's all about VSX. These guys right here, these headphones. VSX is a system that pairs these headphones with software emulation that creates the sound of different studio and non-studio environments for listening purposes. Now, right now, my studio is basically down. All the treatment has been ripped off because I am moving to Miami. In 2 weeks, we're opening up a big commercial facility, which I am going to operate, and I'm very excited about it. But unfortunately, that means that my main system is a little bit untrustworthy. It sounds crazy in here, so I'm 100% dependent on VSX to do my mixing for the next few weeks, and I'm fine with that because I've done that many times. The question people ask is, if I have my ideal studio environment set up, do I still use VSX? And the answer to that is absolutely. I just use it in a slightly different way. Instead of being 100% dependent on VSX, I do my main body of my mix on my monitors, and then at the end, I take VSX and I start referencing different environments, the cars, the clubs, the phones, because they start giving me different pieces of information that allows me to take my mix and get it from 95% to 100%. It just reveals certain things that my main environment doesn't. And this video is going to be all about doing exactly that. So I'm going to play this record here. This is IrisRados, Last Goodbye. And here we go.
If we're gonna deny that the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies see my tears run dry. So I'm singing like, this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye.
So at this point, I want to put in a little disclaimer, which is if you have VSX, you are going to get a slightly different experience out of this tutorial than if you don't. If you don't, I think this is still going to be a very interesting video, and I think that you should still listen to it, but you are going to be hearing emulations of different spaces without having the proper equipment to hear them the way that I am. If you do have VSX, I would say pause this video, get VSX ready, put it on, and we're going to give it a listen. So what I do is I take VSX, and my home base is Stevens Midfield. So that's this room right here. From there, I'll do just sort of a preliminary check on things. So let's bring this in. Let's turn this down. Let's throw on VSX. And let's give it a play.
If we're gonna deny that the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies see my tears run dry. So I'm singing like, this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye.
And what I'm finding is that everything checks. The energy is good, the balances sound proportionate. That means that my main VSX room and what my monitors have told me are matching up 1-to-1. Now, from there, I'm going to start going around to the non-studio rooms, and this is the part that I really love about VSX. It lets me check how something's going to sound in a car or a club without having to actually go to the car or the club, and that is a time saver to say the least. So I'm going to pop over onto Club Indie here, and I'm going to start playing through, and I've made some notes about what I think could be better. Just because I've already kind of prepped for this video, but I've got everything sort of put together.
All of your lies see my tears run dry. So I'm singing like, this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye.
What I'm noticing here is just a few small things that I might not have picked up on my main system, particularly in the bass. I'm noticing that the EQ and curve of this sounds a little bit off. So let me play it. The way that this 808 is being used musically is as kind of like a bass line. It's not quite sustaining enough. It's more upfront, punchy in the attack, and what I need is for it to be a little bit more sustain driven. So the first thing that I'm doing is a little bit of multi-band compression in the lows, just keeping the attack sort of in place, but bringing up that sustain energy. Because I need that release to go whoom, like that a little bit. That's what's going to give the pulling side of the push and pull of the rhythm. And then the other thing I'm doing is I'm taking a little bit of that primary bass range, that note, that kind of tone, and I'm taking that down a little bit. I need this to be a little more sub-driven because I have other things that are going on in the bass that are in that space. So let's take our bass stuff out. Put it back in. And now that'll hold down the weight of the low end a little bit better. The club indie should sound a little bass heavy. Not as bass heavy as the other club, but a little bass heavy. Let's see if I pulled up anything else from Club Indie. Yeah, so the other thing that I noticed is that some of my effects are just way underrepresented in the club. The stuff that's going to give that club energy, like this, right at the downbeat of the chorus, that needs to be way up. We can't hear that at all. And if we're in a club, that's the kind of stuff we need to make it feel like a party. So I'm going to add a ton of energy to that sound. That's way better. That feels like a party. That's the kind of energy that we need, and especially in a club, that's the kind of energy that we need. So the next thing that I would check would be the car. So here I'm going to go over, and I like all three of these cars. They kind of all give me something a little bit different, but one of the best checks is actually just the regular old SUV. And it's because it's not quite as good as some of the other cars. These other cars feel like hi-fi systems, whereas the SUV kind of feels like a stock system, and I find it translates to more cars than the other two do. So let's pop on there. Okay, we're in the car, and now let's go through some of the things that I notice in the car.
We're gonna deny, let the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies, see my tears run dry. So I'm singing like, this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye.
So I'm noticing a lot of stuff, actually. One thing is that the image feels a little contracted, and also the vocal sounds a little dead. So one of the things I was playing around with when I heard that was like, I wonder if the reverb off of the vocal in the chorus could be a little more exciting. So I soloed it up. Like, yeah, that feels a little plain Jane. I didn't notice it on some of the other places that I was listening, but let's make this a little more exciting for the car. So here I'm doing a mid boost on Spectre, which is a combination of EQ and distortion, and it's happening only on the sides in the mid-range. So that's going to stretch out the information in a very colorful way, and then I'm also adding a little bit of distorted top across the entire signal. And it has this instant effect of making the vocal feel more exciting. Even though it's the reverb off of the vocal, there's sort of a weird psychological trick where you kind of prescribe the sound of the reverb onto the vocal itself. So by making the reverb more exciting, it makes the vocal more exciting without making the vocal brighter or more mid-rangey. So really cool little move there that I thought really helped. Let's see what else. We've got the bass in here. So we get to this part. So this horn I felt was a little bit narrow sitting, and also the tone curve felt like it was a little bit on the overly bright side and could use a little bit more body. So first we're doing a little bit of EQ to just kind of ease off the top end. And mind you, there's hi-hats going, there's lots of bright sounds that are present here, so we don't need a ton of top end from this, and a little bit more weight helps to fill out those mids. And then the other thing I'm doing is I'm just stretching it out. So because the car is contracting the image a little bit, it's like, okay, maybe I could go a little bit wider on one or two key elements, and we end up with this. So let me take those two effects out real quick. Feels a little suit and tie. Let's add them back in. And that really improves things in a lot of subtle ways. It makes the whole image wider, it makes the hats feel like they sit a little bit better, and one of the things that I really like to check in the car is just the connectivity between the lows, mids, and highs, particularly how the low mids sit. Sometimes cars will sound a little disconnected between the lows, mids, and highs, so by adding just a little bit more low mid information, 300 hertz, 400 hertz in like a key spot, it also helps with that connectivity. So it's like a lot of little things that just kind of make it come together. And then similarly, we have some transition stuff here that I just felt was a little weak. If I'm in a car and I'm listening to this, that's not going to be strong enough of a transition. So again, just adding a little bit of level here, just a simple balances thing on that transition move. And actually, I think I could go a little further with it, to be honest. Yeah, I like that. I think that takes care of everything except for one other thing I noticed in the car, which is that it's a little bit less bright than I want it to be. And now this record is supposed to be very bright. That is the genre, that is the feel of it. So I added a bunch of top end while listening in the car mode. If we're gonna deny that the rules don't fight, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies, see my tears run dry. So I'm singing like, this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye. And I'm using a particular EQ for that. I'm using the custom series equalizer, which has a very smooth, broad slope. So it allows me to get a very gentle top end lift. There's already enough energy and edge in the top end where if I just do kind of like a brute force top end lift, it's going to get harsh pretty quick. So I was pretty particular about that EQ. Sometimes people ask why choose one EQ over the other, and a lot of times EQs are interchangeable, but this is one of those times where there's a very specific reason. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to listen to is the phone. Right? Now, you might think, why would you even ever bother to listen on a phone? And the answer to that is for the same reason we listen in the club and in the car. In reality, our clients are not usually going to be listening in studio environments making these decisions. They're going to hear the record and they're going to assess their record in the car. But a lot of the times, the first time they hear the record is actually just going to be playing off of their cell phone. So checking just how things sound on the phone is very, very useful. So one of the things that I did was when I got to the bridge, I turned up the verb. So right now, I'll put it back down to where it was. We'll listen to the bridge. Now, there's a lot of reverb going on, a lot of different delays and reverbs. They're getting lost. The cell phone's too narrow. It's too focused on the brightest tones. And so this middle verb here is just kind of vanishing. So I turned it up. gives it a little bit more life and a little bit more energy there. And then the other thing I was noticing was that when we are in the chorus, the snare seems to run into the other upper mid-rangey kind of elements. Because phones don't have a lot of headroom, they kind of distort and saturate pretty early. They get smushy, and you can lose a lot of clarity. So I'm going to activate this stuff. I also noticed that just this particular sound right here, this lead, it kind of lacks a little body and it's a little bit overly bright. So I'm also changing the EQ curve here. All right, and then let's add in our sidechain off of the snare. Okay, we've got that in there. All right, so now let's play this with those effects on. Okay, so let me take those two effects off here just to play it again how it was. And then with the effects on. So it just sounds a little more pleasing on the phone setting, and what we'll find is that this is going to translate really well. We'll circle back to Steven's room at the very end, and we'll find that all these moves make a lot of sense in the greater context of everything as well. So also notice that these strings in the bridge need to be way louder, so we're turning them way up. It's a way better balance. Now, these are things that I might notice on other VSX settings or even on my main monitors, but the fact is I didn't notice that. And so switching up the perspective also has the added benefit not just of hearing it on a phone or in a car, but also has the benefit of just changing the perspective. When you change your perspective, you start to notice things you might have otherwise mixed, and that's why good monitoring is really truly so important. Being able to switch that perspective really improves your sense of musicality. So, okay, let's see. Was there anything else in the phone? No? Okay, so then the very last step here for me is to sort of work my way back to Steven's room. So I'm going to first go over to the energy room on the Nearfields. These are the NS10s, which is going to be pretty close to Steven's midfields, but not exactly the same. These do reveal something particular. They reveal whether or not the snares are loud enough. They reveal whether or not the vocal is too harsh or needs to have more energy. Like, there's very specific things that NS10s do reveal. I don't like to mix on NS10s particularly, but I do understand why people like to. They can be very revealing. So one of the things I noticed was that just the snare is not loud enough.
Together. If we're gonna deny, let the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies made my tears run dry, so I'm singing like this is our last goodbye. This is our last.
Oh, there we go. Needed to be even a little louder still. All right, the snare seems to get eaten a little bit by the limiter here. And then the chorus vocal felt like it was a little bit upper mid-rangey. So maybe a little bit more low mid, little bit less upper mid, maybe a little bit more level overall.
If we're gonna deny, let the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn.
You can hear something way up in like the 4 or 5K range where it's not harsh, but it just feels like it's a little overly energized. So just pulling a little bit of that stuff down and then adding a very broad little bit amount over in the lows.
If we're gonna deny, let the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your life
Makes the vocal feel a lot bigger.
if we're gonna deny, let the rules on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies made my tears run dry, so I'm singing like this is.
And then kind of the same thing on the verse vocals as well, something similar where it just needed more mid-body. So originally sounding like this. And it became particularly revealing in the bridge. Alright, so let's add some mids here. It just makes the vocal sound a little more solid in the arrangement, and especially in the bridge, I feel like it gives it a little bit more soul. Sometimes, this is kind of where like some of the muddy stuff will sometimes happen, but it's also where some of the soul kind of happens. So finding that sweet spot right in those lower mids is pretty important on vocals. So okay, now that that's all done, we then go back to Steven's mix room here into the midfields, and we listen and say, okay, does this now sound good? So we play it. Let's play it from here. Picturing life of us together. If we're gonna deny that the road's on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies made my tears run dry, so I'm singing like this is our last goodbye. Yeah, it sounds really good. It just sounds a little clearer and cleaner, and everything is kind of sitting ever so slightly better. So it's not like a huge change, but it's definitely a change. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bypass VSX. If you are using VSX, you can take the headphones off at this point. And now we're going to do the final test back on our regular speakers, where I'm going to play everything without any of the stuff that I changed through the course of using VSX, which is why I was using trim plugins to change the level of things for the most part. All right, and we're going to play it, and then I'm going to pull everything back on and play it again. If we're gonna deny that the road's on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies made my tears run dry, so I'm singing like this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye. If we're gonna deny that the road's on fire, then we might as well crash and burn. All of your lies made my tears run dry, so I'm singing like this is our last goodbye. This is our last goodbye. You were everything. And I know it's good because I want to keep listening to it. That's really the main thing. Like, it sounds better, but mostly it just feels a little better. So that's how I use VSX as a reference, not just as my main source. So the point being is, one of the reasons I'm such a strong advocate for this particular product is because I feel like whether you have a good studio setup or not, there is still a viable use for VSX. So if you're like setting up a studio, or you plan to have a studio but you don't have one yet and you're just making do, you can start with VSX, and then when you build up your studio, it's not like VSX loses its utility. It's still very relevant to the mix process. So alright, that's my video. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notifications so you get notified. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.